Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin. This time we're going to be talking about sacred places, power spots on the Earth. Our guest is Jim Swan, an environmental psychologist and project director for the Institute for the Human Environment in San Francisco. Dr. Swan has been studying sacred places all over the world for years. His PhD is in environmental psychology. He's been a college professor and has published 4 books. What do we mean when we say sacred places?
Well, a sacred place is a place on the earth that's different, but it's different in a special way. It's different in that it seems to bring out that quality within us which I think we would consider to be special, sacred, unique. It's the sort of thing that makes people, they say, feel more human, more powerful, more alive, and literally to be able to become part of a greater whole. They report the fact that indeed it's the sort of place where at a sacred place I become more than I have been at any other place, to quote one of the people that I've interviewed about this.
What are some of the sacred places that we might have heard of?
Some of the most famous sacred places are places like Mount Fuji, Delphi, the Black Hills of South Dakota, Mount McKinley or Denali in Alaska, Mount Shasta here in California, Lourdes in France. You can, in the state of California alone, there are literally hundreds of sacred places, but some of the most famous would be Mount Shasta, Point Concepcion down near Santa Barbara, which is the western gate to the Chumash Indians. There's the Coso Sacred Hot Springs, the high country of the Siskiyou Mountains, that's right up along the California border, that's sacred to the Karok and the Tolowa and Hupa and other Indian tribes of that area. There literally are thousands of sacred places all over the world. Some of them have structures built on them, like the Great Pyramids, Lourdes, Chartres Cathedral. Others of them are just simply natural. They may be often in wilderness settings, like the high country of Northern California, for example, the Blue Creek area on the Siskiyou Mountains, or in Mexico, the sacred plateau of the Huichol Indians, where they go every year on their annual peyote quest.
When we talk about a sacred place, it seems that what you've mentioned so far, particularly the places here in California, are associated with a particular group of individuals. The American Indians had a number of sacred places.
Right.
It would have an impact on them because they know the history and the tradition, and they know what's supposed to happen to them when they go to that place.
Yeah.
But what about someone who just wanders into a so-called sacred place? Are there many instances in recorded history where sacred places have had an impact on someone that didn't know they were sacred?
Good. Yes. Yes, indeed. In fact, that's one of the things that's been, I think, most interesting to me in researching this area, because we've tended to look at sacred places a lot in recent times as belonging to somebody else. You know, it's sacred to such and such a group. The reality is that if we look closely and ask people questions, that we find that people do have experiences, often not planned for, when they do go to sacred places. Let me give an example of one. That there was a woman who I know is a professional writer in the area here, who felt drawn to Mount Shasta. And she went up on Mount Shasta with a friend of hers, got out of the car, and began to hear these light tinkling bell-like sounds. She said it was just beautiful, almost like chimes, and felt this sense of energy about her, this lightness, just tremendous beauty. And she said that it was beyond explanation. Really, words didn't fit it. She came back to the car, and her friend listened to her story, and she just smiled and said, "You'd heard the bells of Mount Shasta." And my experience is that there are many, many people who have had these kinds of experiences, and for the most part, they don't share them. The famous author Peter Mathiasson, who's written a number of very popular books, describes a case where he was exploring the high country in the Siskiyou Mountains with several other people. And they came to a certain point, and one of the men started talking about how he'd been up there once, and he felt a similar kind of an experience where seemingly time and space seemed to transcend. Everything became magical. Just there was a special quality about it. And he was almost embarrassed to tell this, but somehow he felt compelled, and the other two people with him just kind of sat there and looked at each other and said they'd all had the same kind of experience, but they'd always been afraid to tell somebody about it. What it seems to be is that there is a force, a power, a presence about a place, at least some places, which seems to be more strong, evocative, and powerful. And it seems to bring out some parts of us. Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, I had dinner with him not long ago and was talking to him about that and asked him what were the most powerful places that he had ever visited. And he thought about it for a moment and said Palenque would be one in Mexico. Delphi was another. And then he said the caves at Lascaux in France. And I said, well, why do you feel that they were most powerful? And here's a man just familiar with the mythology of the world. And he said, you know, when it comes all down to it, while they were unique in their own way to me, I felt more powerful and more alive and more human there. And I really can't explain it, but that's what happened to me.
Are we dealing with something that is on a psychological level, or have there been attempts to scientifically verify? Have there been tests of energy fields or something of that nature? Are there similarities with regard to longitude and latitude of the so-called sacred places?
Oh, yeah. There have been some, and we need to do this a lot more, really, to be able to understand what is the nature of the sacred place. You can look at the electromagnetic fields of certain places, and we do know that some of them, for example, are located along earthquake fault lines where you're likely to have exceptionally strong localized fields. Some cases, like the Black Hills of South Dakota, you'll find that the geology there is extremely unique. It's the oldest granitic basalt uplift in North America, and the kinds of fields that are generated by that place are unique and special and different. And we know that when a person walks into a place like that has an unusually strong field, that their own internal electrical processes will harmonize with those outside them, and it's something called biological entrainment. So it literally, after a while, the place sort of entrains us. You can also look at soil and water that's unique in some places. One particular area, the Indian Hot Springs area in West Texas, is a beautiful example of all these things falling in place there. You'll find at Indian Hot Springs, which is a group of 22 springs situated along the Rio Grande, that the water there contains unusually high amounts of lithium and several other kinds of chemicals that are used for various kinds of medicinal purposes. They've been there for as long as we know. The springs have been sought out by the Indians and the curanderos from Mexico for centuries. And it's also near a fault line, so we have unusual field phenomena. And one of the fascinating things is that you begin to see how the soil is different there. There's a little bit more natural uranium, for example, in the soil. The water is unique. The localized atmosphere is special because of the field faults. It feels special there. And you put all of them together and you kind of create a place where it's maximally possible due to nature for a person to transcend themselves, to unite with something beyond themselves.
What about individuals that would see themselves as being immune to the so-called sacred places, that don't believe in it, that go there and say, well, this may be sacred to so-and-so, but it isn't going to have an impact on me?
Okay.
Can they psychologically build up an immune system to whatever's going on electromagnetically or chemically or in terms of soil, water, and the environment?
Oh, that's good. Yeah, good. Well, what you can say is, first of all, that an experience at a sacred place is a personal thing. Is that we can't all go to such and such a place and expect for the same thing to happen. It's based on who you are, what you are, and whatever. The real notion of a sacred place is you surrender to the place itself, and then whatever happens is good. But it's the sort of thing like with acupuncture that some people say, well, acupuncture doesn't work. Well, the reality is that if we know enough from psychosomatic medicine that your belief system has a direct influence on your personal experience and the effectiveness of certain subtle factors. If you go in and say, I won't feel anything happen to me, then you probably won't. But just the same as you can sit and say, I won't feel a needle being stuck through my arm, and if you do that well enough, you won't feel the needle. The point, though, is what happens if you just go in with a sense of open-mindedness, skepticism, but not to dismiss the fact? Then what you can begin to experience, at the least, is a sense of renewal. Because at sacred places, they tend to be evocative scenery, things that will touch you deeply. Beautiful mountains, flowing water, trees, perhaps some buildings that have special mythical significance to you. We know that if there's a high presence of negative ions in an area, that tends to have beneficial effects on a person. If the electromagnetic fields are such that they're strong enough and they're within the alpha brainwave frequency, which is the case at certain sacred sites, that literally walking into a place, you're getting a high dose of negative ions, you're getting entrained by a relaxing field. I mean, why fight it?
Okay. What about sacred places that are there evil sacred places that make you crazy?
Well, that's an interesting question. Let me respond to that in two ways. According to ancient beliefs, there are some places that are very, very powerful. There's, for example, in Wales, there's Mount Patrick Coghlan. That the folk legend is that if you spend a night on Mount Patrick Coghlan, you will either become a poet or a madman in the next morning. Okay. Now, there are some places which, according to dowsers, sensitives, traditional cultures, which they believe that there's a malevolent force that can exist there. And this is something we need to look at more seriously, because there's an ancient Chinese system called geomancy called feng shui. Geomancy is the art of divining what is supposed to go in various places on the earth. It's the forerunner of all modern environmental planning. And they believe that indeed that there are certain places that encourage certain human activities and others that discourage them. If it doesn't fit with modern science, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just may mean that modern science doesn't know what to look for. So I'm going to say there's clearly a nearly universal belief in such things, but modern science as yet has not been able to really understand just what does exist with that belief.
What about personal experiences that you've had? Have you ever been to a place that has had a negative environmental effect on you, other than the streets of New York City or something like that?
I've been to some places where it just didn't feel right to be there. You'd feel anxious, nervous, places where it would just sort of boil inside of you. Yeah, definitely. I've been in places I didn't want to stay there. Yeah, definitely.
You're talking on a more of a scientifically verifiable plane. In many instances, you talk about energy fields, geology, earthquake faults, and things that we are starting to measure. We're kind of scratching the surface on it.
Yeah.
What about is it possible that a belief system, that a human energy could put something into a place, that the Indians, for example, held a place sacred, and therefore it took on characteristics?
one of the most, of course, that is a belief. And one of the main purposes of ceremony and ritual to honor certain places was to do exactly that. Um, Rupert Sheldrake's theory of morphogenic resonance here is one that I think deserves to be looked at seriously because, on one level, it actually affirms the idea of the belief of traditional people that you can kind of create a pattern in a mind field over a place that orders, structures, and facilitates the energy there. And that's precisely what a ceremony does. So,
Stonehenge.
Oh, yeah. Stonehenge is a beautiful example of that. And let me tell you a story about a couple of those circles over there, because there are all kinds of accounts of people having unusual experiences at Stonehenge, Rollright, many of the other stone circles. There's a group of researchers from the University of London who went out there and they said, let's actually look and see what exists here. Supposing we take a very sensitive instrument near these stones and measure it, measure the fields that exist there. You know what they found? They were unique. That there is a strange field that exists within, up to 30 to 40 to 50 yards of that stone circle. They think part of it can be explained by the lattice structure of the stone, but that may be just a way to, explain, to help scientists accept that it exists. And the most fascinating thing is that they started measuring it on an annual and seasonal and daily basis, and they found that it fluctuates in direct relationship to the movement of the sun, which is just like all the theories about that being a solar observatory, that the strongest pulses appear to be at the equinox, the strongest fields. Sure, I mean, there's a classic example of that, of science literally beginning to affirm ancient beliefs.
You put together a medicine wheel gathering with some American Indian spiritual people. What's that all about?
Okay. Working with Sun Bear, who is a Native American medicine man, I organized the medicine wheel gathering for him in 1980, the first one. And there's a fascinating story that kind of helps to understand the importance of a sacred place. At least it was a profound experience for me, in that what we were looking at was the idea of finding a gathering site for a place which would bring into the material world a visionary experience of a medicine man, which was Sun Bear had a very profound, moving vision that he was supposed to hold a gathering to bring together people from all races, creeds, and colors around a stone circle that was significant of the powers of the four directions and things like that. So what he said to me was, Jim, we should have a ceremony to be able to ask for the blessings of this. And we held a pipe ceremony. And then after it was finished, he said, now you should sleep on this. And what happened was that I had a dream experience that later proved to be the exact place where the medicine wheel ended up happening, which is right at the foot of Mount Rainier. And it was a profound, vivid dream that it involved, I was standing under a bridge suddenly, in a Technicolor kind of thing, like you could walk into a movie, with a fellow dressed in a green suit. I'd never met him before. And we talked for a minute, stepped back. Out of the ground rose two serpents, and they came up out of the ground rapidly, crawled out from under the bridge, went up a road, a dirt road, turned left. They were crawling very, very fast along the side of this field, that on one side there was an open field, and the other side was a forest of red cedars. They went to a special place that was like a clearing and began dancing rapidly and turned into two rabbits. Now the dream stopped at that point. Well, as it turned out, that the gathering, we didn't know where it was going to happen at that point, was held right near Mount Rainier. And to get there, you would turn off the main highway, going over a creek with a bridge. And the bridge, about 100 yards past the bridge, you made a left-hand turn, just like in the dream. And when you went driving along down the field, And at the end of it, there was a clearing where the actual medicine wheel was held. The man in the green suit turned out to be the forest ranger who was on Forest Service land. Now, I have no explanation for that rationally, except that when I told that to Sun Bear, his acknowledgement says, good, that means the Great Spirit wants it to happen there. Now, that goes beyond quote-unquote normal science, but in a way, I think what we have to start doing is taking human reality and experience and accepting it as literally something that happens and being valid. And from that, we can begin to start understanding the reality of the Indians, because they have a great wisdom, I think, to teach us.
According to this belief system, is the Earth a being in its own right? Has a heart and a brain?
Oh, yeah. The Earth is a living thing.
Where's the heart of the Earth?
Well, that's interesting. The heart of the Earth can have a physical location, but it's also a sense of the fields of the Earth pulsating just like your heart pulsates, of beating with the flow of the universe itself in response to the movement of the planets and the moon and the sun. We can talk, however, specifically in the American Indian belief about the Black Hills of South Dakota, the Pahasapa, which translates to be the heart of the Earth Mother.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's...
How about the brain of the Earth? If the heart is in the Black Hills, where is the brain?
Oh, my. Well, I think we'd have to call it the mind rather than the brain. Okay. And if you look at it that way, then in a sense the brain is multifaceted. And the elements literally are all around the Earth. They're as if, and that's literally what the sacred places are, the centers of intelligence, so to speak. You can think of the Earth as sort of like a globe. If you looked at the image of there being glows of extra strong light being all around the Earth that collectively sort of harmonize with us, that make the Earth sort of a sense of life and pulsating. They're like the crystals, so to speak, that receive energies, translate them, and turn them into something more special. That would be one way of seeing that as the brain, because in a sense all of the Earth is sort of like a mind. And in fact, there are several ancient traditions that talk about the Earth mind as being something that's literally an intelligent force of such that involves the entire Earth.
Is there a special significance for the Mediterranean area?
Well, in a way, according to Joseph Campbell, looks at that as sort of being the origins of many of the great religions. And so, in some respects, that area has had longer duration of human civilization than any other part of the world. So the sacred places there, in some sense, are charged with a greater history of human activity than any other place. That would certainly be one way of looking at that.
A great deal of development and mining are currently underway in areas that have been traditionally considered sacred places. Has there been any feedback, fallout from that?
Oh, yeah. There are a lot of controversies concerning that. And here what we have are literally two conflicting value systems, because a place of power in a traditional view is a place of sacredness, of spirituality. A place of power in another belief system would be a place where you could mine uranium. The Black Hill, an interesting fact is that a number of the sacred places of the world are located in places where there are high deposits of naturally occurring uranium ore. I think this needs to be looked at. Edgar Cayce, the great sleeping prophet of this country and seer and healer, said that there was something unique about natural uranium in terms of its healing properties. I've never seen that any other place, but I note that a number of the sacred places in the United States and Australia and other parts of the world have uranium ore there. And it's almost like a challenge, for modern people to make that decision. Are we going to really say that the greatest power is a sense of spirituality, Or is it to build bombs, nuclear power plants, and that kind of thing? It's almost like they're forcing us to make value judgments there. It's clearly an important issue, and the Black Hills of South Dakota in the United States has been one of the most powerful situations, of all in that respect.
Are there areas of the world on the planet where there are no sacred places? Are there any vast stretches of just flat out boring terrain?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Because one of the things that you find is that in virtually all cultures all around the world, there is a belief in sacred places. And it's not as strong in modern culture, but if you look at the roots of every person alive today, there is a tradition which worshiped the earth and nature and that believed in sacred sites. As far as I know, there are sacred sites literally all around the world.
You've been involved in environmental education. What would the world be like in the future? This is kind of pie in the sky.
Okay.
If our children were all deeply concerned with nature and went back to earth worship.
Okay. I think what we need to do is to say that I need to quote Carl Jung here to start out, because he said that whenever you make a step forward in human evolution, you must first make sure that you're firmly rooted in the past before you step forward. Otherwise, you run the danger of moving out of harmony with nature. My sense is that what we would begin to create is that the power of sacred places is to inspire our own creative process. I mean, that's what they've been used for from the beginnings of time, for recreation. We know that the best ideas in science, and technology, politics, or whatever come from human creativity. So simply the fact of surrendering to the power of a place to inspire us begins to ask our own creative process to move with a different force behind it, a force much bigger than just our own personal self. It's a sense of creating out of a desire to increase and maintain harmony in the world, rather than to seek power and control, which has been the tendency in modern times.
Is there a sacred place in the Bay Area that people could go to? And if there is, how should people approach it?
Okay. Well, there are a number of places. Mount Tamalpais, by the way, is a sacred site. My belief is that you approach a sacred place with a sense of respect, that you approach it as if you were going to have a relationship with a person. It doesn't mean that you have to conduct a ceremony there, but it means that while you're there, you need to look after it, to take care of it, and in its own way, it will take care of you. It's the sort of thing that, for example, Mount Tam has been the inspiration for an incredible number of artistic works. If it's destroyed, carved up, if it's littered, then that's the kind of thing that, in a sense, detracts from the quality of the place. And it's as if we lose that natural source of inspiration for our own work. So my sense is that you approach a place like that, the idea, if you see trash, clean it up. If you respect the trails, you try to actually leave it better than you found it in the first place. And in a sense, what that does, it not only respects the place, but it supports the sort of the collective minefield of human actions that have taken place on that mountain. And if we can believe that Rupert Sheldrake is right with his morphogenic, resonance, then indeed that does have an effect, and it makes it even better for the next time you come back there, or for anyone else. If everyone does that, I mean, that's, that just, it's an amplifier. It makes it even stronger.